Welcome into Sportsmemo's betting podcast for May 23rd. We're breaking down the ACC Atlantic Division college football preview podcast here with Rob Veno. Rob Veno, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I am great today, Drew. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, man. Excited to talk college football. Hey, it's only May, but here at Sportsmemo, we are talking college football. You can follow Robbie on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports, myself at Drew Martin Betts. Robbie, let's start off here with the Clemson Tigers. We'll work our way down to kind of projected order of finish here in the ACC Coastal. But starting off with the defending national champion, the Clemson Tigers, 15-0 last year, winning the national championship in Santa Clara over the Alabama Crimson Tide. Went 9-6 against the number, meaning if you bet on them every game, they did cash out ahead, going 9 wins and 6 losses against the spread. So, Robbie, going to throw it over to you, but we're seeing Clemson pretty much plus 220 to plus 250 in terms of the bet to win the national championship. That's a pretty terrible bet there. I mean, the sportsbook's going to hold on to your money for a long time, and you're really only getting about 2-1 odds. But let's be real. They're going to reload. Dabo Swinney's got something good going there in Clemson. They did lose a lot up front, especially on the defensive side. Dexter Lawrence leaves, Christian Wilkins both depart to the NFL. Some other losses across the way, but this isn't Northern Illinois, Robbie. We're talking Clemson here, and they're on the level of right there pretty much with Alabama when you're talking reloading. The guys coming up after, they're likely 4- and 5-star recruits, can get after it, and NFL prospects themselves. So I'll throw it over to you. What are you thinking here in this upcoming year, the Clemson Tigers? Bet on or fade?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say fade, Drew, because I don't know that prices on Clemson could be any higher than what they were last season. And you're talking about a team that in 12 of their 15 games last year, they were favored by 15.5 or better. A lot of those games in the 20s, a couple in the even higher than that. So I don't know that they can be asked to lay any more than they laid last year. And with all that, they wind up going 11-4 against the spread. So that's extreme profit when you're winning almost 75% of the time against a point spread. Like you mentioned, there are some things that perhaps you could pick at and say, well, maybe Clemson won't be better on the defensive front. When 3 of your starting 4 defensive linemen go in the top 17 of the draft, that's pretty good. We know this is a team that just reloads with 5-star recruits now, but when you have a cluster position that gets decimated by the draft, it's hard to have guys come in and grab that continuity or the same continuity that that team had years ago, for 3 years now, right? They all chose to come back and play for the national title, which they got. So maybe they're lesser on that particular area, Drew, but I wouldn't think much. Otherwise, as far as personnel goes, we're not going to have any problem. Or Clemson's not going to have any problem maintaining with Trevor Lawrence, with the wide receiving core, with the offensive line, with the running backs. They're going to put up their share of points. The offense is humming on all cylinders right now. So I don't think you could fade them. Can you play this team in one particular direction totals-wise? Last year that was kind of a split. 7 overs, 8 unders. The problem with that is as much as they score, the defense was that good to keep games that are very high priced total-wise under the number. They only allowed 13 points per game last year. Overall, there's not a heck of a lot new, and we went through this with Alabama when we talked about Alabama in our SEC West preview a couple of weeks back. There's not much new to say about Clemson anymore. They've established a level that's an elite level, and it is the elite level, I guess you would call it now in college football. There's a couple of those up there, Alabama and Clemson, and they just come back each and every year right now with their reloaded product, and there's no turnover inside that coaching staff, so you can't even point to anything that might go wrong there. I mean, it's just rinse and repeat basically with this team. So I would think they're probably still going to be a good team to bet. Their schedule, Drew, especially their road schedule, is about as weak as you can get. I mean, where's Clemson going to straight up lose a ball game? Their away ledger has Syracuse, who gave them probably the toughest time last year inside the ACC. Syracuse, North Carolina, Louisville, NC State and South Carolina. Just don't know where they're going to lose a road game. Everything else is at home. So, Clemson, same old story, I guess. I wouldn't bet against them. Maybe there's going to be particular situations. Possibly there'll be a particular situation where you could try it. But I don't know. I don't think against Clemson will get any of my money this year.
Yeah, Robbie, you bring up a lot of good points there. I mean, when we talk about program trajectory, where they are in the landscape of college football, you're not listing many programs ahead of Clemson, if any at all. And when you look at their schedule this upcoming year, we're seeing Georgia Tech off the start, and they get them at home. Georgia Tech's going to be down this year. Texas A&M following that's home as well. Last year, Texas A&M gave them a ball game early on in the season. Of course, that one was in College Station. And then you brought it up at Syracuse, Week 3, September 14th. That is a night game. I'm seeing it 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC. So people are already starting. They're probably already circling that game as far as when you talk about straight up losses. You're right. It gets tough to kind of pick the spot where they're going to lose. I haven't dug deep into South Carolina, how the Gamecocks are going to be at the end of the season, but they get a bye before heading to Columbia to face the Gamecocks, so I doubt that one really comes up and bites them. Other than that, you're right. A lot of their away games aren't very good outside of that Syracuse game. So if I threw it to you, a minus 110 on each side, 11.5 wins for Clemson. Are you taking the over? And of course, if you're new to betting, and when you're talking season win totals in college football, you're betting on the regular season, which is 12 games. So when I say 11.5, pretty much are they going to lose one or more, or you think they run the table?
If I was guaranteed that what they have on paper at quarterback is going to be constant for all 12 games, I'd bet over. But we know one injury to Trevor Lawrence could throw this whole thing into an upheaval. They're not as rich at quarterback as they were last year. Remember, Kelly Bryant started the season. Dabo had a quarterback in the wings that he knew would be more productive than his starter and made the switch. Kelly Bryant transferred out. He'll be the quarterback of Missouri this year. Trevor Lawrence steps in, and boom, here comes national title. But if that kid gets hurt, this team becomes a different team immediately. So it's hard for us to say. That's why off-season betting or out-of-season betting on these games or on these future bets is a little bit difficult. You're betting off of paper, and you're betting that what you read on paper or what you see on paper right now is going to maintain throughout the entire season. The best thing I can say, or the best bet right off the bat, and one that I've gotten involved in already, and it was kind of maybe wrong for me to say earlier that anti-Clemson won't get any of my money, because as I said that, I realized I've already played Texas A&M plus a monstrous amount of points. Now, I got 20 points when I played the game. It's currently down to 15 over Texas A&M, so there's been a lot of A&M money. But I think A&M could be a spot where the game is closer than the spread indicates, and a lot of that predicated on what went on last year in Jimbo Fisher's first year at A&M, the way that Kellen Mond and company played Clemson close. So, that's a long-winded answer to your question, Drew. But, if Trevor Lawrence is healthy, they probably would run the table.
Yeah, great player there in Trevor Lawrence, and it seems to be a good guy off the field as well. That always helps when your quarterback seems to be a good person and the rest of the locker room kind of respects him. So, obviously sky's the limit. Not saying anything surprising there with Clemson. Wouldn't be surprised if they go back-to-back national championships. Of course, there's other good programs, Alabama being probably their biggest competition, among others, but it's likely to be a great year there for Clemson. Robbie, let's move down the chain here in terms of projected finish. Might be upsetting to some other teams, Florida State in particular, but let's go with Syracuse next. Dino Babers in his third year. They do have offensive line issues. 3 starters leaving, and with that passing attack that he brings there to Syracuse, that could be an issue. Last year, 10-3. Also very, unique here to Syracuse. Went 9-3-1 against the numbers. So if you were betting Syracuse last year every game, you made some money. Of course, these numbers can go, 9-3, 8-4, depending what number you're grabbing them at. But on the closing line, I believe it was 9-3-1 against the spread, betting Syracuse. As far as schedule-wise, Robbie, Looks like they start off pretty weak here. Liberty, Maryland, and then, of course, that Clemson game we just talked about from the other side. Pretty timely bye weeks. They got two of them both in the middle of the season, one before the NC State game and then before the Duke game towards the latter half. So I think the bye week set up well. Syracuse, let's see, 300-1 to win the college football national championship. As we're talking right now, I'm not seeing a season win total on Syracuse. Chris Andrews in the South Point usually leads those out. So besides the top programs in the country, I'm not seeing a season win total. He is sick. Prayers to Chris Andrews, the sportsbook director there at the South Point. But either way, not seeing a season win total here for Syracuse. But Robbie, I'll throw it to you. What are you thinking for the Orange this year?
Yeah, well, it's one of two teams inside this division that loses their starting quarterback, and a productive one at that. Eric Dungy, obviously for the past 3 years, had been the heart and soul of Syracuse's offense, spent some time injured, and Syracuse had to try and fill in for those times where Dungy was hurt. But I think in their case, having Tommy DeVito step in and play as well as he did in those games is certainly a plus for Syracuse. There's a difference, and head coach Dino Babers actually got together with offensive coordinator Mike Lynch in the offseason to see if they could make some adjustments to this offense. Not any major adjustments, of course, but the difference being that with Dungy on the team, there was a designed quarterback run element to this offense, which won't be present with Tommy DeVito, who's a pure drop-back passer, probably a better thrower of the football, actually, but certainly not the runner. And the guy who's going to make broken plays into positive plays with his legs, that like Dungy did for so many years with this team. So you probably see a couple of minor different things here from Syracuse. They're talking about maybe throwing some more screen passes, stuff where they can get the ball out of DeVito's hands quicker, because as you mentioned, there's some offensive line issues here, and they don't want him back there like a sitting duck. So we may see some quick hitters out of this offense more than usual. But we know Dino Babers in this up-tempo offense, we've seen it enough. His spread, it does go quick. It is unique. It works on trying to grind people down physically, exhausting the opposing defense. All those elements will still be there, but we may see a few different nuances inside that passing game. Defensively, I think they've come on, Drew. They made some strides last year. You would expect them to make even more strides this year. Defensive coordinator Brian Ward has said that he thinks his defense is on its best path so far this season, heading into 2019. I would agree with that. If they can play any sort of defense, which they did last year, actually only allowing 27 points per game is good for Syracuse. You turn that into a real good season like they did. You mentioned 9-4 or 9-3-1 against the spread. They're starting to get some recognition. The power rating went up last year, so obviously prices are going to be a little bit different. But that being said, Syracuse down the stretch last year in their last 6 games went 5-1 against the number. As they were getting better and their power rating was going up, they were still covering numbers. And against some good teams. I mean, they covered against Notre Dame. They covered against West Virginia in the bowl game. So they covered against North Carolina State. It's not as if they played lousy teams and covered. I think that Syracuse certainly, you used the word uptick before. This team's on an uptick for sure. And we'll see where odds makers price them. I think when Syracuse plays, the betting public generally tends to look toward the total first before the side, because you associate points scored with Syracuse. But we'll see where they come as far as against the spread numbers are concerned, where sides are concerned here. And maybe, we can, with DeVito, maybe odds makers take a couple points off because they've lost a quarterback. And if so, Syracuse might provide a little bit of value in that instance.
Robbie, next up, the Florida State Seminoles. And when you talk Florida State, man, you're thinking bowl games. You're thinking one of the best programs in the country. And I'm talking, past Florida State. Their 36 bowl game streak was snapped this past year. They only finished 5-7. So for my whole lifetime, they've been making bowls. Last year, not so much, unfortunately, there in Tallahassee. When you're talking Florida State, and you're looking for positives, offensive coordinator, Kendall Briles, comes in. He's up and down. We're going to see a lot different style offense as long as he's able to do what he wants to do there in Tallahassee. Last year, just 5-7 straight up against the spread, 4-8. So if you were betting Florida State, you were losing some money last year. Over-unders, 8 overs, just 4 unders. A lot of that attributed to their defense in Tallahassee, Robbie. They gave up 31 points per game. That's got to be the worst Florida State defense in quite some time. Robbie, I'll throw it over to you after going over briefly their schedule here. They start off with Boise State. I believe that one is in Jacksonville. Get ULM at home week 2. And then a tricky spot here at Virginia week 3. That's an improved Virginia team. They get 2 well-timed bye weeks in the middle of the season and then one towards the latter of the half before heading to Gainesville in their Sunshine State rivalry there against Florida. A tricky spot at Boston College, November 9th. Always tough having Florida kids travel up to the Northeast in the month of November. They get Miami at home. They get Syracuse at home. And at Clemson, that one might just be chalked up as a loss anyway. So putting that one on the road might not hurt them overall. Betting season wins. They're 100-1 right now. 100-1 to win the college football national championship. What are you thinking here in Tallahassee this year, Robbie? Bounce back bet on, or are you still thinking this is trending in the wrong direction for the program?
Yeah, this one's going to have to be a wait-and-see approach here, Drew, and we'll look at their summer practices a little further to see if maybe we can uncover anything there as an indicator to whether we want to be on Florida State early, against Florida State early, total-wise, how we want to play them over-under. But let's just bring up a couple of things to show you how deep Florida State fell last year. When you look at some of their defensive numbers or overall statistical numbers, for instance, I'll point out the fact that they only converted 29% of their third downs last year. That's the type of number you get out of a bottom feeder, not Florida State. And they lost the line of scrimmage per play, rushing yards gained per play, rushing yards allowed per play. FSU only gained 2.9 per play and allowed 3.5 there, minus 0.6. Unheard of in Florida State football under Jimbo Fisher, Bobby Bowden. That goes a long, long way back. Those are just not FSU numbers. So they have a lot of digging to do to get out of the hole they're in, or a lot of climbing to do to get out of the hole that they're in. And it does start with the guy you mentioned, Kendall Briles. Willie Taggart went to South Florida and ran that Gulf Coast offense, rode that thing to success for a couple of years, and he got it from Kendall Briles. Actually, before he took that, or when he took that South Florida job, he picked Kendall Briles' brain at Baylor and took a few of his concepts, went down there. We remember Willie Taggart being from Stanford as an assistant, and then when he went to Western Kentucky, all he wanted to do was run the football. He took Jim Harbaugh's style with him. Converted down in South Florida, tried to do that last year, and it just didn't work with this Florida State offense. And I'll say it again, we said it a lot last year, but if there were 2 offensive system overhauls that were jamming square pegs into round holes in 2018, it was Arkansas with Chad Morris taking over for Brett Bielema. Nothing about those 2 are the same on offense. And it was Willie Taggart bringing this Gulf Coast offense in to where Jimbo Fisher had previously coached. Nothing between those 2 offensively, philosophy-wise, is common. So now you're in the second year of the system. You figure it gets a little bit better, but you've brought in a new offensive coordinator. Here's what Taggart had to say about the whole thing. I brought him here to do what he's been doing everywhere he's been. That's scoring points and going fast. And the spring practice showed it. This team might end up being the fastest team in the country. Now, we know that Kendall Briles, when he was at Houston, I think they were number 1 in tempo last year. And they're trying to get off 90 plays a game. They were running that way in spring practice. They're going to be that way during the season for sure. And the great thing about Briles' offense is the fact that, it's extreme tempo, but it's so diverse. If they want to go air raid, Drew, if that's what turns out to be the best part of their team is the receivers and the passing game, they can go full out air raid. Kendall Briles, this offense really likes to run the football first. Remember when his dad was at Baylor, the play calling percentages tended to lean towards the run ever so slightly. So they like to run the football, and they've got a workhorse running back in Cam Akers. So I would expect to see that type of offense here. Extreme tempo, maybe like a 52-48, 53-47 split percentage-wise where play calling is concerned toward the run. The kids at Florida State, the personnel right now have had an immense amount of excitement for this offense during the spring. He coaches without a playbook. Doesn't believe in a written playbook. Basically keeps a play sheet in his pocket and lets the talent on the field visualize what's going on. And they seem to be picking it up right now. So we'll see. He's given free reign. He's going to call all the plays. I think that this is probably the biggest key to Florida State's season, whether or not James Blackman can run this offense. You know, one other thing here, Drew. DeAndre Francois, former starting quarterback for Florida State, transferred out. James Blackman, who's been here before and started, takes over. Right now, he looks like the guy for the job because he's got the dual threat capability. But Alex Hornibrook transferred here from Wisconsin, and I don't know how that fits whatsoever. The good news is that if Blackman gets hurt, you've got a kid that's played 2.5 years as a starter already to step in. But we should see Blackman. They've recruited towards the system now, kind of weeded out what was there previously, so I think they'll be better. I got a lot of faith in Kendall Briles. I think if I had to choose without seeing summer practices, I'd probably like to get on the side of Florida State because I think athletically they're there, and certainly I believe in the offense working. So it's a work in progress. We'll see how it goes. But to me, biggest key to this whole season for this team will be how quick, or let's put it this way, how well Florida State can execute that offense right out of the chute, because you talked about their schedule, and 2 of those first 3 are very losable if it doesn't work right away. So we'll see how Blackman does as starting quarterback in this offense.
Good breakdown, Robbie. And it's interesting because when a quarterback transfers out when he's still got eligibility as the starter, it's always kind of eye-opening, you know, what's going on there in the program. But some situations, we saw it with Hawaii last year. Drew Brown, he transfers out, and the new kid comes in, Cole, and he plays very well. I could see that situation happening here. It's almost like as the starter, you feel the backup kind of nipping on your heels. That could be a situation with Blackman coming in. He's a Glade Central product. That's a great high school football in the state of Florida. Also, you bring up Hornibrook transferring in. Do you know the situation there, why he transferred out of Wisconsin?
Yeah, for Wisconsin, they were going to go with the sophomore quarterback this year. Alex Hornibrook, as a graduate senior, could basically have his pick of where he wanted to go. Why he chose FSU, I'm not sure. I understand why he went out, why he left Wisconsin, because they were going to go a different direction. But why you pick this system, Kendall Briles' system, I have no idea. I don't think that's actually helpful for your NFL prospects. I don't think running this type of offense is something that scouts look at and say, oh, wow, that guy's a great fit for the NFL. So if you were trying to enhance your NFL stock, which in his case is minimal at best, you would try and find some type of pro-style offense somewhere, or that type of coaching. The fit doesn't make a lot of sense to me, Drew, because he's not even going to start here. Normally you're looking for a place where you go start.
Right. That's why it's kind of a little head-scratching, and he had some success there at Wisconsin in the past. But, guys, we're talking with Robbie Veno at Rob Veno Sports on Twitter. You can find all of his plays at sportsmemo.com. You can get his NFL college football season up. It's up and available right now, so check it out at sportsmemo.com. He's a man of many talents. NBA playoffs, he's 67-41. That's 62% against the spread since 2016. NBA, as we inch closer to the NBA Finals, some good deals on sportsmemo.com, and he's 60% NBA playoffs since 2016. Robbie, let's move down the line in the ACC Atlantic Division. Let's talk the NC State Wolfpack up next. 9-4 last year, just 6-7 against the numbers, so lost money. But however, they put together back-to-back 9-win seasons. I believe NC State has good program overall, good program trajectory. What are you thinking this year with the NC State Wolfpack?
This is an interesting. There's a lot of things to talk about with this team, but let me start with the fact that first off, they hired promoted new offensive coordinators here because they lost their offensive coordinator, Elijah Drinkwitz. Remember that Drinkwitz had come from Boise with Ryan Finley. They almost came as a package, and they left as a package. A lot of good years, a lot of production offensively. Finley gets drafted into the NFL, so they lose an NFL caliber quarterback, and now they have kind of a three-man race to see who wins the job. Now, coming out of the spring, it's still listed as open. It looks maybe like sophomore Matthew McKay has the heads up on the other two, but we'll see what the fall brings. That's going to be their biggest problem because there's a lot of good things with North Carolina State. Now, I know that what you'll read is, they suffered a lot of program loss, personnel losses this past season to the NFL draft. But NC State, having some bit of knowledge into that program itself, they're recruiting better than they've recruited in a long, long time under Dave Doran. Last year, during the summer, I was having a talk with my brother-in-law happens to live down there, and I was having a talk with him, and he said, it's the first time that NC State's been able to bring these 4-stars into this program and to get high-level JUCOs into this program at the rate that they were getting them. Dave Doran's done a real good job bringing talent in, and this year's no exception. They've recruited very well again. They've got a lot of talent waiting in the wings to take over for positions where they were, I won't call it decimated, but where they were hurt. One of them being wide receiver. They were really hurt by a couple of junior defections to the NFL. But I think they've got the pieces to fill in. Quarterback's going to be the biggest thing here. There's no change in the offensive system because McDonald and Kitchings, the two new co-coordinators, have been here before. Here's the catch, Drew. The NC State, in the history of this program, has never had co-coordinators. It's not clear at this point who's going to be doing the play calling on game days. Now, one is assigned to the press box, one is assigned to the field. The only thing that's clear is that if head coach Dave Doran doesn't like the play call, he can overrule it at any time. He's still got final say. These guys work, and you would think that this is how they would work, and it is how they're going to work. They work as a run game coordinator and a pass game coordinator because one's a wide receiver coach, there's a running backs coach, so it makes a lot of sense. Run game coordinator, pass game coordinator. But that dynamic, which, when we handicap games, we don't sit there and say, oh, gee, I wonder who's, going to call the plays on the sidelines, this guy or that guy. But when you watch a team play, 2 weeks into the season, you can say, wow, that offense looks different, whether it be positive or negative. So this is an interesting situation with these guys. I think it'll work out okay because all three of these guys, head coach, both coordinators, have been together in this program now for a while. I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. In fact, from what I read, none of the three think it's going to be that big of a deal. The real big deal is on defense. How about Dave Huxtable, the defensive coordinator, comes back, but then in the offseason they hire Tony Gibson to be a co-coordinator. For those listening that don't know, Tony Gibson was the defensive coordinator at West Virginia, and in a lot of cases, the highest rated defensive coordinator by Big 12 insiders in that league, because what Tony Gibson was able to do for Dana Holgorsen with that defense last year notwithstanding, but the couple of years prior, he brought them to really nice strides. And having him here, this is a guy who had multiple opportunities and his phone was ringing off the hook and he didn't know what he was going to do, and he got this call to come be a co-coordinator and jumped at it immediately, said he's just got an affection for Dave Doran's style, for Dave Doran the person, the whole 9 yards. It's a great fit. So I love what they're going to be able to do on defense. Tony Gibson is a guy who's a secondary coach by trade. NC State's weak spot right now is in the secondary. I think you're going to see a real Not that they've been bad, because they've been good, but I think you're going to see NC State continue to be a really good defensive team. They're certainly not one of the higher sought-after teams by the public. It's not one of those teams when Saturday morning comes that people are rushing to the window to bet NC State. They still kind of fly under the radar. That's a good sign for guys like me who may want to play them this year. The key is going to be the quarterback play, of course. We'll see how that goes. You hate to start the season without a returning quarterback, but East Carolina, Western Carolina right off the bat, then West Virginia third week. Guess what? There's nobody that knows that West Virginia personnel better than Tony Gibson, who just came from there. So perhaps they can get off to a real good start before they have to face an ACC opponent, which will be week 5 against Florida State. I got an arrow pointing up on NC State. We'll see how it goes.
Robbie, you bring up Finley and the OC, Drinkwitz leaving. Where did Drinkwitz go?
Drinkwitz left for... He took a head coaching position, Drew, and I'm trying to find it for you.
Okay, no worries. I was just interested because I know a little bit about his background, and you brought up the fact he went out to Boise State and they were a package deal. He's a Gus Malzahn disciple as well. And he's a really good offensive mind. That's why I asked you, just because I didn't know off the top of my head where he went. But he's definitely a bet on wherever he did go. And I'll lead into the next team, and don't worry about it if you can't find it. We'll run. He took the
App State job.
That's right. I do remember that. Okay, App State. That's going to be an interesting. An interesting team when we break down the Sun Belt, which, guys, we will be breaking down every college football team there is out there, even the independents, Sun Belt, Conference USA. It's all coming up. At least one college football division preview each week up until opening week of college football season. So stay tuned to sportsmemo.com and the podcast archive page. It's up there. And make sure to check out Robbie Veno's college football and NFL full season as well. And you can follow him on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports, myself at Drew Martin Betts. Robbie, let's move down the list here. Let's talk Wake Forest up next. Wake Forest went 7-6 last year, 5-8 against the number. Looking at their schedule real quick, starting off with Utah State. That one will be interesting handicap there. 8 p.m. Eastern time on Friday, August 30th, the Friday before really week 1 of college football starts. Then they're at Rice. Should be an easy win there before they start ACC play against North Carolina and the Tar Heels. They end the season at Syracuse. That will be a fun one. They're also at Clemson. Going to be a tough one there. 2 timely bye weeks. One before Louisville in October. One before NC State in the end of October. So I like that in terms of bet on. What are you thinking here in Winston-Salem with Wake Forest Demon Deacons, Robbie?
Well, it's funny what Dave Clawson has done with this program to kind of act as their anchor or their trademark, Drew, is they've gone up-tempo. I mean, they have now become one of the fastest teams in college football. I think last season they ranked number 3 as far as tempo was concerned across college football, which is extremely different than what Wake Forest used to be. And they've got good quarterback play coming back. Remember last year that Kendall Hinton was supposed to be the starter, had played real well the year before, and got suspended, and they had to go to 2 freshmen. And those 2 freshmen had battled it out right to the finish, and Jamie Newman actually had won the job, but he got hurt. And when he got hurt, Sam Hartman was your starter for game 1 against Tulane. Hartman played well. He got hurt. Newman finished the season. So I have no problem with Wake Forest on offense. The only problem you could have with Wake Forest on the offensive side of the football is they don't get a bunch of big-time skill position players to that program. And we know that Greg Dortch was everything at wide receiver for Wake Forest last year, and he's gone. They have to find a new Greg Dortch. We'll see what they put together here where that's concerned. But I think that right now, Wake Forest offensively, I would not worry about. That's a team that ended up last season averaging 33 points per game. So it's a good offense. Defensively is where you have some troubles, Drew. And, as much as things change, sometimes they stay the same. And for Wake Forest this spring, things stayed the same. we talked a bunch of times last year on the Sportsmemo Every Game on the Board podcast when the Wake Forest game came up about injuries and how they were just suffering a mass amount of injuries, especially at the linebacker position, where Dave Clawson, after about 5 weeks, had said, we don't even have one linebacker left anymore. They went through starters, they went through backups, they were just patchworking anything at the linebacker position, and they were getting scored upon, like running water. Teams were going through them. They wound up firing Jay Sawville, their defensive coordinator, 5 games into the season, and they replaced him with a couple of guys on the staff as co-coordinators. At the end of the year, Lyle Hemphill got the job. He coached the bowl game, so he's got 1 game under his belt. But the reason why I say things stay the same, Wake Forest didn't have enough healthy defenders to have a spring game this year. Already, the injuries are just piling up on the defensive side of the football. Now, Dave Clawson expects that a bunch of these guys are going to be back, but you just wonder in today's football, especially on the defensive side of the ball, when the other side, most offenses are playing up-tempo, and if you don't have depth, then you can't survive as a defense. And Wake Forest, the injuries got them last year. They've already gotten them this spring. They make me question what's going to happen this fall. I tend to just look at Wake Forest solely from a total standpoint as an over team, a team that's going to get scored on, a team that's going to score on its opponents. And last year, as far as over-under is concerned, they wind up going 7-5-1 according to my numbers against the closing spread. Again, like you say, you might see 7-6, you might see 8-4, whatever number you got, but right in that vicinity of 7-5-1. I think they're a good over team. They're going to play some squads out there that can score as well. And point production to me in Wake Forest games. Well, we'll check, of course, the health of that defense come August and see what they're going to put on the field. But my larger concern would be depth defensively. When you don't have enough guys to have a spring game and you can only run like a hands-off scrimmage, that's pretty telling. So for me, Wake Forest might be an overlook this year.
Robbie, let's move on to Boston College. Last year finished 7-5, also 7-5 against the number, and 6-6 over under. Their schedule this year, they're starting off with Virginia Tech at home. They also get Kansas and Richmond, a Division II school, or FCS school, and then Kansas, bottom rung, Division I, and Rutgers not very good either. So the beginning of their schedule outside of the Virginia Tech game looks pretty manageable there for Boston College before getting into the ACC schedule. Their first bye week, October 12th, their second one, November 16th, before traveling to Notre Dame, Indiana, to take on the Fighting Irish. That will be an interesting game there out of conference. Or actually, I guess Notre Dame is considered, I'm not really sure if they're ACC or not at this point. But either way, Boston College, a pretty good year last year, surprising year. How are you viewing betting the Eagles this year?
You listen to Steve Adazio talk in the offseason, Drew, and he's the first to admit that he was very, very reluctant to go to more of an up-tempo style. In other words, to keep up with the times offensively. Boston College for years has been known for producing offensive linemen and great ground games. They have a great running back in A.J. Dillon. He's back this year. They're missing some pieces on the offensive and defensive line where, usually the trenches are a strength of this team. I think they have 3 new starters on both sides of the line here this year. But Adazio said that it was necessary to go up tempo. They did so with some success last year. For BC to average 32 a game and for BC to score 27 or more, I think it was 8 times last year. That's a lot for Boston College. So the change to the higher tempo, it's not extreme by any means, but they are playing more quickly on offense. Now they have a new offensive coordinator in here, Mike Bajakian. He coached for Dirk Cutter last year in Tampa Bay. So you've got an NFL coordinator coming in, and there's some changes here now for this team, and I think that it suits BC real well on the offensive side. Mike Bajakian said that this team is going to live in 12 personnel. 12 personnel meaning 2 tight ends, 1 running back, 2 tight ends. They're going to live in that personnel this year because he's a firm believer in using the tight ends in the passing game, which I think we see, Drew, when we probably watch as much college football as anybody out there. There's not many teams that utilize the tight end, but those who do have an awful lot of success in their passing game. BC happens to have a plethora of really good tight ends, so it's going to work out well for them, I think, to go with the running game with A.J. Dillon. It will help returning quarterback Anthony Brown out, because Anthony Brown, not the most accurate passer, but tight ends are safety valve guys, and some of those patterns are easier to throw, and some, I think in college football especially, wind up being far more wide open than others. There's going to be an RPO or RPO concepts added to this playbook. So this playbook wasn't changed. They consider their offense multiple, but now they call it multiple with spread principles. And they took the original playbook, or the playbook from last year, and they're just letting Bajakian add on to it. So far, so good. And again, coming out of the spring, everything is usually so far, so good. But I like the fact that BC has the running threat, and if they can add the passing threat to it, and especially one that defensive coordinators have to honor everybody, wide receivers, tight ends, back out of the backfield, this RPO stuff, because Brown's a good runner. It could cause havoc to opposing ACC defenses. On the defensive side, they have a new defensive coordinator, Bill Sheridan, was their linebacker coach last year. Here's a guy who came from the NFL but got fired twice for doing a lousy job. So we'll see how he steps in as defensive coordinator here. Like I say, he was with this program last year as the linebacker coach. He's familiar with the personnel. There's no changes there. BC, if nothing else, they're steady, Drew, every single year. As far as record is concerned, you can almost write down on paper what you expect out of BC and have that at the end of the season. But I think there's kind of a shift going on at Boston College now offensively, and perhaps a team that is always traditionally totaled in that game totaled in kind of that high 40s, low 50s range. Usually you see a Boston College game over under anywhere from 48 to let's say 54 on the high end, and I think that might change this year because they're going more offensive. Adazio has broken here, kind of like what Will Muschamp did at South Carolina when he broke and gave in to the faster tempo. So I think we may have some value with BC here as far as over the total is concerned. We'll look at it further, but as far as the early look here in May, that's the way I'm looking towards them.
Robbie, we only got one team left in the Atlantic, and guys, next week we'll talk the ACC Coastal with Robbie Veno. You can follow him on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports. I am Drew Martin on Twitter at Drew Martin Bets. Check out sportsmemo.com. Robbie Veno's full NFL and college football season up and available. That is going to be the best deal for getting the full season. Better than each week or just buying a play. So that's already up at sportsmemo.com. Check it out now. We got last team up in the ACC Atlantic, Robbie. We got the Louisville Cardinal, 2-10 last year, really down year, 1-11 against the number, almost losing every game. Feel bad for you if you were betting Louisville last year. Over-unders 8-4 towards the over, meaning if you bet them every game towards the over, you would have won 8 and lost 4, attributed just as much to their defense being bad as their offense being good, Robbie. I'll throw it over to you. I know you know a lot more about this program than I do, so how are you looking to bet Louisville this upcoming year?
Yeah, last year, Louisville, towards the end of the season, Drew, they got tagged with that 2-word phrase that no competitive athlete or competitive program wants to be labeled as, and that was gave up. And you could see it in their final scores. Last 4 games, 77-16, 54-23, 52-10, 56-10. Granted, all 4 losses were to bowl teams, but still, you can't be losing by 40 plus every week. And you watched their play on the field last year, and they just didn't look like they wanted to be there. The team was going through the major upheaval. Bobby Petrino obviously ousted there after their 10th game. Lorenzo Ward steps in, tries to fill in as interim head coach. They didn't keep him. This is a whole new staff, a whole new day, and this goes right along with that theme I laid out earlier, square peg into round hole. Scott Satterfield comes over from Appalachian State. He brings his guys with him. Majority of his guys with him on that coaching staff at App State, and the philosophy is nothing like what Petrino had. If you start on offense, Bobby Petrino's a guy who likes pro style, and he defines his offense as vertical down the hash marks. It's the furthest thing from what Scott Satterfield's going to do. He likes to run. Their run play calling percentages every year that he was at App State, which is 5 years, were 60% run or heavier. Now, you could say that 60% might be somewhat skewed because Appalachian State played a lot of games in the Sun Belt where they led in the second half and just ran out clock by running the football. But the bottom line here is that's his philosophy. He wants a workhorse running back, and he wants a quarterback that can run. He needs a dual threat. He's got to get all brand new personnel to fit his system, which is what Chad Morris had to do at Arkansas last year, which is what Willie Taggart had to do at Florida State. Scott Satterfield's going to go through that this year. Like I say, new coordinators on both sides of the ball. Defensively, Drew, I don't know how they could be better. This team's going to be in their third defense in the last 3 years. They're going to be under their third coordinator in the last 3 years. They were 3-4 defense 3 years ago. They went to 4-3. Now they're back to 3-4, which is what App State plays. Very aggressive, disruptive. They love to be in the backfield. Their version of the 3-4 is a little bit different than others, where they're just trying to take angles to get into the backfield and be as disruptive as possible. It worked at Appalachian State. For those of us who follow the Sun Belt, we know all about App State's defense and how good they've been under Satterfield. But you're teaching a brand new thing to these kids at Louisville, and I'm just not sure it's going to work, especially as a lot of this division seems to be getting a little bit better. Louisville's got to sink a little bit more to climb out. Offensively, like I say, they won't be anything reminiscent of what Bobby Petrino had there. And then you look at the schedule. They're going to start with Notre Dame right away. You probably want to be on the Notre Dame side in that game. I know there won't be much game film for ND of what Scott Satterfield's going to put on the field here, but they'll just go to some Appalachian State tape and probably be able to stymie them in that opener. Eastern Kentucky, Western Kentucky, and then Florida State. Boy, I don't know, Drew. 1-11 against the spread. Once again this year, probably not. But a winning record against the spread, I don't think that's plausible for this team. This ACC schedule, their crossover games are going to be Virginia and Miami of Florida, which are not easy games for this team. To me, another losing record. We'll see how much or how the odds makers pad them as underdogs here, because I'm sure they're going to be getting a couple extra points. Their power rating probably couldn't sink any lower than what it sank to at the end of last season. I just remember from my own power ratings, that team dropped like a lead balloon when I was going over numbers this spring and in preparation for this podcast. It's really hard to drop them any lower, but I did have to drop them, I think, by another 1.5. So maybe what you saw at the end of the year is what you'll see here. One thing we know for sure, this isn't going to be a give-up team, so you can forget about the team you saw on the field the last 4 weeks of last year. They're going to play with a lot of heart, a lot of energy. Obviously, Satterfield demands that, and we'll see where they go from there. But it's not a team you really want to hitch your wagon to right off the bat, that's for sure.
No, it's going to be wait and see for me. I can tell you that, Robbie. I mean, one of the worst Power 5 teams in the country last year. And, with the change in administration, I think that they could possibly be a bet on. I doubt we see this team quit in the latter half of the season, right, even if they're up against it talent-wise. I agree with a lot of what you said there, Robbie. And, guys, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it. We'll be back next week. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up, the like button. That will help us out. Also, please share on your social media networks. Get the word out about sportsmemo.com. Reach out to Robbie on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports, myself at Drew Martin Betts. Love to interact. Feel free to ask any questions, anything you want answered on the podcast, sports betting, any sport, heck, life, anything. Robbie's a great therapist as well. He'll help you out in a lot of different ways on the podcast. But Robbie, thanks for the time. And guys, we'll be back tomorrow talking with Teddy Covers, NBA, Major League Baseball, and NFL on tomorrow's podcast. So best of luck with your bets. We'll talk tomorrow.